Right, so we have talked at great length about the whole notion of reduced intrusions. These are magmas at depth. They send up these little apophyses, and these things can be very, very, we'll say, robust gold targets, gold exploration targets. They often occur in clusters, like you see here. I want to do a bit of a refresh today. Kevin inspired me yesterday from some comments about talking about why we are invested in certain stories, and I want to kind of explain the underlying thesis. It's not just about geology. It's not just about geology, but geology drives a lot of it. Let's talk about this, because I think that this model that you see right there, the upside down udder, is basically the model that one should kind of plant in their head to think about these exploration stories that I'm about to talk about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, of course, we're talking about reduced intrusive gold systems. These, there's different acronyms for them: reduced intrusion related gold, et cetera, et cetera. There's all sorts of acronyms. I don't care. Acronyms kind of drive me nuts, quite frankly. But the way I think of these are basically magmas, bodies of molten rock that were deep in the ground. They usually derive from melting, passive melting of lower crust. So it's not like they're, in an active arc terrain where you have subduction and stuff. These are often just melting when you kind of sag some crust down into a hotter thermal regime, and you get melting of lower crustal rocks. And these magmas then, they differentiate and they want to rise back up to surface, which is really interesting. I wish my lava lamp was going here. I just noticed my lava lamp burnt out. I'm going to have to find a new lava lamp light bulb, which I don't even think they make anymore. But anyway, you get the overall gist. Now, this is a schematic model that you see here. It is really just showing how these things are emplaced. They are like little fingers, or like we saw in the upside down udder. But the gold that occurs within them can actually take different forms. Okay, it can take sheeted veins, a form of sheeted in this model. You can also see breccias, the little triangular things in the middle finger there, if you will, where you get brecciated rock, which is simply broken up rock, and the fluids can percolate up in there and form gold. You can also get structures that kind of come off of the intrusion or feed off of the intrusion, and the fluids can find those structures, and they can replace or rocks are joining the intrusion, or they can the fluids can flow out and into fractures and fissures that extend away. But it's a pretty simplistic model. Why do we use this term reduced intrusion? Well, it so happens the chemistry of these magmas is often, relatively deficient in oxygen. Okay, and chemically that means that these things have, we'll say, a higher, fugacity or reactivity of sulfur in them, and other things that can attach to gold and carry gold. So oftentimes we see a disproportionate amount of gold end up in magmas that are reduced, and I think that's why these things can be, they're basically vehicles for carrying large volumes of gold from the lower crust up into the upper part of the crust. Think of them as a giant cycle of gold. Think gold cycle. Okay, so these things are basically pulling out of the deep crust large volumes of gold and then reconstituting it at a shallower level, sometimes within reach for us to find and exploit. All right, but there's your upside down cal model. Think about all the different settings we have, because quite frankly, each one of these things tends to have its own little unique flavor. But okay, let's go to the next slide. And then I've shown this slide before too. This is really Craig Hart's geochemical zoning model. So instead of looking at this in cross-sectional view like the previous slide, we're actually looking at this thing in plan view. So we're looking straight down, from top down. And the pink thing you see in the upper left there, that is your intrusion where it's expressed at surface. Obviously, if we're seeing it exposed at surface, Mother Nature must have eroded down into that granite body to expose that. But you can get sheeted vein complexes in an intrusion like that. So you can see the little black lines there. Those are represent gold deposits. Usually, when you're in the core part of the system like that, you see gold, bismuth, and tellurium. Sometimes tungsten too. I've even mentioned tungsten in a few examples. Like at Sitka, they have a lot of scheelite popping up in a lot of the core. All right, so basically, you have the intrusion itself as a prospective host, but you have the rocks around it. So extending outwards, you have these zones of geochem, and those are where the veins and whatnot take the gold out into the country rocks adjoining the intrusion. You can have arsenic gold systems extending outwards, and then beyond that, arsenic antimony gold systems. SP is antimony, and then even beyond that, you can get silver-rich systems with base metal, so silver, lead, zinc systems. Classic district for this kind of zonation, and this is really where this model was derived, is actually around Mount Hinton near Keno Hill. So Keno Hill, many folks, Greg Hart included, view the high-grade silver base metal deposits there as being the distal expression of a reduced intrusive, and the reduced intrusive in that particular district is believed to be over at Mount Hinton, which is where one of our companies, Trifecta, is actually exploring. Anyway, don't want to digress, but this shows you kind of the overall pattern that you might expect. There's a few little nuances in here I might point out, like lampripheres. What the heck is a lampriphere? Well, a lampriphere is basically, it's usually a dike-like body, so it's a magma that came up with small fracture. And lampripheres often have a composition that indicates they're derived from way, way down in a mantle environment. And why are they important? Well, because if you see lampripheres, it means that the cracks in that particular area must have been really deeply rooted. And usually people view that as a positive for gold, positive for the emplacement of gold systems. So lampripheres always kind of get geologists a little excited. The other thing I would point out is that this model, while we're looking at it in plan view, it can also be applied in cross-sectional view. If you can imagine tipping this up, you'd basically have the gold, bismuth, tellurium central to the intrusion, like the fingers we saw in the previous image, and you'd see this zonation extending outwards from there. So don't think of it in just a very 2D way. It's a 3D model. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, I would argue, and this is kind of the fundamental point of this whole presentation here, I would argue that the gold industry, and I'm talking in general, the gold industry needs a new generation of gold discoveries, gold deposits that it develops over the next few years. And I've talked about, the fact that the Tintina belt, the Tombstone belt, some people call it the Tintina belt, which extends from Northwest Territories through the Yukon over into Alaska. It has a large number of these reduced intrusives. So these things tend to occur in districts. Is that to say there's no other district like this around the world? No, there are. There's some in Australia. There's some in South America. There's some in Siberia. There's some in, they're sprinkled all over. There's some in China. Anyway, these intrusive type, reduced intrusive type gold systems are real. They really occur over a broad geographic, setting around the world, or they occur across broad geographic settings throughout the world. Now, I would argue that the reduced intrusive type systems are discovery friendly. What does that mean? Well, if you think about Snowline, when they had the Valley project, but prior to any drilling, the data that they had was really just lightweight superficial data. They had a few rock chip samples, they had some soil samples, and they could see the sheeted veining in a few outcrops. Okay, and that was enough. That was enough to go, you know what? We should poke some holes in this. In other words, it didn't take a lot of brain cells to go, and that's not to mean anything disparaging to anyone. It just means that it was a no-brainer of a target. Okay, it was, hey, let's walk up and drill this target, and they did, and it's been a wild success. Okay, and since that time, we've seen one after another discovery of this type made. All of them tend to have sheeted veining, at least the targets, most of the targets we've talked about. So that's, visually, that's a very important aspect. Very easy, discovery friendly indicator. They tend to have the bismuth and tellurium signature, maybe a bit of arsenic, things like that. But they tend to be walk-up drill targets. Look at Rackla. They staked, I kid you not, they staked Grad last year about this time, and they're drilling it. They're already drilling it because it is that friendly of a target. They didn't have to sit there and do, millions of dollars of geophysics and other stuff. They said, wow, look at all these sheeted veins, and wow, look at all this outcrop, and let's drill some holes. All right, so they're discovery friendly. They are also big assets. Okay, these reduced intrusive systems often lend themselves to becoming tier one assets that are capable of producing. And in I set the bar here. I put it at 400,000 ounces. Is that a magical number? No, it isn't. But I would say that's the kind of number that you need, or a major mining company needs these days, to make a meaningful impact. Think about it. Newmont is not going to go around wanting to develop a bunch of 100,000 ounce a year producers, because it really doesn't have that big of an impact on the bottom line. But a Newmont is sure as heck going to want to find a 400,000 ounce producer, because that's, it's a little less than 10% of the current production, but that's meaningful. Okay, that's something that justifies a big company spending their time and effort, money, and so forth. All right, so it's gotta be big, baby. Okay, so tier one assets, and that's very typical of these reduced intrusive type systems. They also tend to have long mine lives. They can be 20 plus years. I mean, look at Fort Knox. I think I was at Fort Knox the day they were pretty close to the day they opened in 1996. I think it was Q3, is like September-ish or maybe August, can't remember. But that's not quite on, almost 20 years, and they still have several years left. So look, these things can have very long mine lives. They tend to be high margin, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides in the upcoming slide deck. But these are very, very profitable deposits, mainly because they have such friendly metallurgy. The gold is what we call free milling. What does that mean? Well, it means the gold is not locked up in sulfides or some other mineral phase. The gold is actually accessible to various forms of milling and even heap leaching that are cheap, friendly metallurgical techniques that make these things very high margin. Okay, so metallurgy is very key, and I always push companies, if there is no metallurgy, I push companies to do that metallurgical work to demonstrate they have the goods. Okay, that's an important aspect. They also tend to be relatively low capex. You might say, well, gee, look at, Snowline's going to be north of $1 billion. Yeah, but you know what? For the scale of mine you're talking about here, something that's going to produce hundreds of thousands. In fact, the first few years at Snowline, I think, is like 600,000 or 700,000 ounces a year. $1 billion X capex for a project like that, that's pretty darn good. In this day and age, that's mighty good. Okay, it's not a $10 million project. It's a, 1 X billion, and that's manageable. And that's manageable for large mining companies too, which is very important, because these exploration companies want to deliver a product to that major mining company. In other words, a discovery that's appealing, and relatively low capex certainly make them appealing. I would also add they can also be scaled up. Okay, most of these systems, you could develop them at a certain tonnage and throughput, and then actually ramp them up too, which is one of the unique or not unique, but nice attributes of these types of deposits. Okay, now environmentally friendly. What do I mean by that? Well, these systems tend to have very low sulfides. Okay, what does it mean? Well, it means they don't tend to generate huge amounts of acid and things like that. In fact, these often have a bit of carbonate mineralogy to them too. Carbonates tend to buffer acids and stuff like that. Quite frankly, most of these deposits end up being nothing more than glorified granite quarries. Okay, they are pretty innocuous rocks that we're dealing with here, and because of that aspect is reclamation friendly. What do I mean? Well, you don't need, you don't have to do a lot of magic chemistry to reclaim these. You don't have to put lime and other stuff on top and new headaches. These things can be reclaimed in a relatively cheap, straightforward manner which also and very thoroughly too. I think, like you can basically have usable land after you're done mining. Okay, so I think that all of these things really make for good gold deposits that the gold industry needs. And that's one of the reasons I kind of champion this particular type of system. Now, what am I going to do today? I'm going to ramble through stories. Many of them I've talked about before, but I'm going to kind of re-emphasize. I'm not going to necessarily do updates per se. If there's an update to tag on to what I'm talking about, I'll talk about it. But I'm going to basically kind of go through the thesis for most of the intrusive related gold systems that we have in our portfolio. All right, go to the next slide. And of course, I've got to start with the example, the granddaddy of them all. This is really the one that sets the bar. This is the Fort Knox gold mine in Alaska. It's not far from Fairbanks. One of the things I'll point out about this mine is notice how the pit is relatively smooth. I mean, it's very repetitive benches, relatively long continuous runs. Why is that? Because this deposit is so big and so predictable. It's just like mining a bowl of soup. Okay, I mean, truly, grade control in this thing, like your average grade control geologist in a deposit like this is going to be like the Maytag repairman. They're just going to be bored to death because they are so continuous and so predictable and so consistent. That's their nature. All right, let's go to the next slide. Huge pit too, by the way. Here's a cross-sectional view through that deposit. What is it? It's really just a bunch of sheeted veins, and you have some, in this case, that are vertical, some that are more flat line, not horizontal, but low angle. And you got different phases of granite there. Yeah, is that a big deal? No. Oftentimes I guess what I would say is these intrusions often come up in pulses, so you get different intrusive faces, but the point is you basically just have a big cloud of veinlets or small veins that kind of find their way through the rock and make large volumes of low-grade mineralization. They're wonderful deposits from that respect. All right, so there's Fort Knox. Notice the scale too. That's 50 meters down there in the lower right. So really, if you took that across the section there, it's probably 600 meters from east to west, or I guess south to north. These are big deposits. They have huge volumes. Go to the next slide. This is an aerial image of Fort Knox. The pit is actually down there in the bottom center. You can see a little bit of water in the bottom of it. So that's where the rocks derive from. But just to the north of that, kind of where that triangular wedge-shaped thingy is, that's where the heap leaches are. So they do heap leach some of the rock here. So low grade. They stack it. They don't crush it, or they don't mill it and stuff. They just maybe do a light crush. Some of it's just run a mine, stack it up, and they sprinkle solutions through it, and voila, the gold comes straight out. Okay, so there's heap leach. But if you look over here, just to the right, upper right of center, you'll see a cluster of buildings there. That's the mill complex. And they do mill the higher grade material. When they say higher grade, at this point, we're talking like half gram or, type stuff. They will put that through the mill. Mill tailings actually are stored over here on the far right. So the area that's kind of turquoise blue is basically your mill tailings compound or storage facility. You have a hybrid milling heap leach. That's pretty typical of these types of systems, and cheap too. Emphasize cheap. The gold comes out well in the heap leach. Comes out very well in the mill. You get gravity gold. The rest of it comes out through cyanide solution. No problem. Great recoveries. All right. So that is a great example. Now, what's going to happen to this mine once it's all done? Look, one thing I'd point out straight away, you don't see a lot of bright oranges and reds and stuff. If you did, that would be oxidizing pyrite. Do we see that here? Not very much. Hardly at all. Okay. That means that they can simply contour the surface, smooth it out, put topsoil over the top, and basically it's a usable piece of land at that point. Okay, these are not environmentally challenging deposits to reclaim. Right? So I'd say in 20 years or 30 years or whenever they're done here, you would come back here and you would see some forested hills. That's pretty much it. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this array is a number of our intrusive related gold systems. I hesitate saying reduced because they're not all entirely reduced, but yeah, in general, they're in that genre of geology. And these stories are at different stages in discovery. Some are well advanced. Snowline is well advanced. Banyan is well advanced. Others are kind of not incipient, but they're definitely in the middle of a discovery, like Sitka and I think even Rackla at this point, Altamira for sure, and even Tectonic up there. But then we have early stage ones. Maybe Rackla should be called the early stage. I don't know. Anyway, Trifecta for sure, Onyx gold for sure. Those are early stage. So we got kind of a spectrum, but each and every one of these has, in general, the same style of system and is chasing the same price. Okay, which is what I mean is, has the attributes that were on the slide a few slides back. It's going to be major gold discovery that can be built into a tier one asset by a major gold mining company. All right, so I'm going to go through these real quickly. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, with Snowline, this one slide they have in their deck, I think, sums it up. It is tier one scale. You can read all these bullets. I don't want to sit here and read all of the slides. I think one of the most amazing things, though, about this deposit is how consistent it is. Look at that first pit. That first pit is diving in on that high grade. It will absolutely kill it. I mean, that thing is going to just puke gold, which is amazing. I think their production is, again, like 600,000 or 700,000 ounces per year the first few years. And even beyond that, once they expand out into the other pits, you're still looking at just an absolute ocean of mineralization there that will be mined for many, many years. Okay, so this has, if you read through all of these bullets, talks about various aspects of the economics and the metallurgy and and you'll see that everything that's listed on that slide is pretty much addressing what I had a few slides back. That is your classical high value asset that gold mining companies need to be looking at and focusing on. That's our next generation of mine. Okay, let's go to the next slide and let's talk about this this project a little bit more. What's really interesting in my view about these systems is they can deliver surprises. Okay, and the big surprise that I think Snowline has delivered recently, they've drilled valley and they've done a great job. They're advancing it towards becoming a mine. That's the pit over here on the left is the valley pit. But look at over here on the right. What do they have? They've got a drill hole that they just drilled recently that hit, surprisingly hit just a big whack with visible gold down it. Do we have assays yet? No. But is that likely a new discovery? I would say, yeah. I think they're onto something new. Very interesting. What is it? Don't know yet, but could it be big? Well, imagine maybe that hole's the first hole into what you see on the left. Okay, take that, boop, put it over here, bloop. Maybe that's a new one. That's the kind of growth you can see out of systems like this. A one drill hole discovery can quickly evolve into something absolutely enormous. Could this be a double? I don't know yet. There's not enough data, but to see a drill hole like 143 there that looks as good as any of the drill holes over there in the valley deposit, and knowing there's nothing else around it really, that gets you fired up. Okay, so good on them. Let's go to the next slide. The other thing people should take away is that Snowline is one of the biggest landholders in the east central Yukon region. Okay, they have huge property position that encompasses absolutely, a huge inventory of these reduced intrusive targets, and they are testing many of these this year. Okay, this company is not sitting still. They're not just going, oh well, valley's it, we're all good, enough said. They are out there drilling and testing many, many targets this year. So I think we're going to see even more good news. Talked about this, I think, on the last video. All right, go to the next slide. All right, Tectonic. Tectonic has not put out a huge amount of news. I got to say, it's been a bit of a, like, anybody home kind of situation, but they are drilling like mad, and they just raised a huge pile of money. Okay, that's interesting. What are they chasing? Well, they've got this flat gold project. You can see it's located in western Alaska. It is fairly remote, but it's near Donnelly Creek, which is a big gold development project. I think to the south from Flat. But they have a property position that's to die for. Okay, they have these reduced intrusions. Uh, you can actually see on the right the blue blotches you see there are basically a sequence of reduced intrusions that extend up through the axis of their property. And they have innumerable targets across the property, all of which have derived alluvial gold. And the pink that you see in the middle, that basically tabulates the amount of alluvial gold that's been produced off of the property over the years. This is a big alluvial gold field in Alaska. That's exciting. Okay, we know there's a bunch of reduced intrusions here that are kicking off gold. Has this thing been thoroughly explored? No, not at all. Okay, that's that's 20 kilometers or something, I think, from north to south. It's barely been scratched, but the company is giving it an aggressive test this year. They started drilling earlier. Thank you very much for starting in June and not the end of August like they did the past 2 years. And they're giving it heck. Okay, I know they're drilling like mad. I mean, the last time I had an update was probably early August, I think, and they had I think something like a couple dozen holes drilled, most of which were up in the Alpha Bowl and Apex are basically north of Chicken Mountain in that area. Why would they drill that many holes? Well, I don't pry and I don't pretend to know, but usually when you see something good, you keep drilling. So my hunch is they're onto something and they're keeping their head down and drilling away. Let's go to the next slide. Alrighty, here's a little 3D rendition looking, I think it'd be northeast. Yeah, we're looking northeast. Shows the soil anomalism in gold across Chicken Mountain, but you can see it extends all the way up to Alpha Bowl there as you go further to the left. That's where the biggest alluvial gold deposit was found at Flat Creek, 650,000 ounces. And last year they hit 1.22 gram gold over 60, I think it was 66 meters there. In the first ever drill hole, like right under that placer. And to me, and that was the entire length of the hole, by the way. But to me, that smells like they basically made a discovery. Okay, now I think they're drilling a lot there, but I also understand that they're kind of stepping back towards Chicken Mountain here as well and drilling holes. And look, I'm not going to pretend to know how this is all going to play out. I don't. But my hunch is based on the soils and the extent of the intrusive bodies as expressed by the magnetics in the previous image, I would say that this is all one big system. I think it's dangerous to start talking about, oh, well, Alpha Bowl is different than Chicken Mountain is different than, whatever. They're all the same thing. Okay. They're all part of the same system. And I think there's enough room here that this is going to be an absolutely extraordinary discovery at the end of the day. All right, so very anxious to see how this plays out. We're dead keen to see the results come rocking in. Hopefully we see some, now that they got their placement closed, hopefully we see some more news come out of the company. But very excited about this story. Go to the next slide. One of the things that we at Crescat pushed them to do early days was do some mat work. This just goes back to what I was saying in one of the beginning slides there, is that metallurgy, knowing that metallurgy is friendly, knowing you can get very good recoveries, 96% average gold recovery, and very low cost techniques. In this case, we're looking at leach kinetics with different composites of oxide and there's no sulfide in this, but anyway, you can see very quick leaching of gold out of these rocks in a very short amount of time, very low reagent consumption, stuff like that, very low sulfur content, etc. This is the kind of stuff we want to find. Let's go to the next slide. By the way, if somebody asked me, would I rather have a Donnelly Creek that's running 2.5 grams gold but is refractory, or would I rather have a 1.2 gram gold that's non-refractory? I'll take the non-refractory any day. All right. Now Sitka, I'm going to jump through these companies, right? Sitka, this image it should really stick in everybody's head, because if you think of the upside down cow model, You can basically see, boom, boom, boom. We've got all of our teeth sticking up here. Okay, we know that they're poking up through the terrain. Blackjack's already a resource. It's growing. Eiger, resource, growing. They've even found mineralization between those in Saddle, growing. Pokemon at Contact. They just announced news this week. Really nice visuals out of Contact. No assays yet, but some really nice holes coming out of there. A couple of weeks ago, they announced from Rosgobble some really nice long intercepts. You can see some of the first deep holes at Rosgobble are showing gold way down. So what is this? This is a discovery in the making. Okay, this is going to be big. In my view, this will be a very, very big collection of deposits. Yeah, they appear to be discrete, disparate deposits, but think about it in the third dimension. What's going on down deep? Don't know yet. Would all these connect? Probably. They're all derived from the same magma. What does that mean? I don't know. Could this be big? Yeah, I think so. I think it could be, have an endowment, say 10 plus million ounces. I don't think that's a problem here. It might be in different, forms. That's all right. That's all right. Is it metallurgically friendly? Yeah. Look, every indicator so far is the gold occurs in the typical way you would expect to reduce intrusions. Little particles, small veinlets. It's all free of, sulfides and It's the right stuff. This is a discovery in the making. It's going to be big. All right, go to the next slide. This is a plan view of that. The cross-sectional view that we looked at was kind of going north-south through here, but you can see how these teats are just arrayed across the property. One of the things I was really encouraged about in the news release that put out this week, not only the visuals from Contact, but I was really glad to see they're going to drill a bear paw. That little target, it looks little, okay, but that bear paw breccia, if you look at, there was a couple historic holes there, 45 meters of 1.69, I think it is, gram, and 52 meters of 2.25 gram. There's some nice holes down there. And after being at the property, in my view, is that is a very, it's an unexhumed intrusion. Like it's just, right below. I think there's a perfectly preserved target immediately below that pipe there, breccia zone. So I'm very excited about that. Anyway, they're going to drill all of this stuff this year. And maybe even more so. There's a Maiku target off to the east. It's not on this map, but that also looked very interesting. Even what's right here, guys, this is big. This is big. I love this story. Go to the next slide. And then this is just some of the core that they put in the news release this week. It's interesting because the rock here, it's kind of a black laminated stuff. That's, the schist or the country rock around the intrusion. This is not actually out of the intrusion itself, but this is from what they call the contact zone. The contact meaning where the intrusion is in contact with the sedimentary rocks and has baked them up. There's little veinlets that have snuck out into the schistose rocks like this. And those quartz veins, look at the gold in them. My gosh. I mean, that's just dripping with gold. It makes you think, gee, if there's some place where all of that comes together, maybe it's a little bit deeper, maybe it's over in the intrusion right next door. I don't know. But imagine finding that kind of gold in a lot of veinlets, very tightly spaced veinlets. Could be rich. Okay. Looks very good. Go to the next slide. Okay, here's our enigma story, but absolutely riveting story. Rackla is drilling away. This is the one I mentioned where the guys staked it last year, and they were like, "Wow, look at all this sheeted veining," and they sampled and they got up to 92 grams per ton on some of the first sampling they did last year. I remember looking at that rock and thinking, well, where the heck is the gold in this thing? It was just a piece of granite with little sheeted veins in it and small specks of bismuth minerals. And it's like, how the heck do you get 92 gram per ton in a rock like that? I've not seen that happen before, but it does. Okay. And in this case, they have been drilling like mad. I think they're on a hole, I don't know, 8 or something here. And what they're trying to convey to people is the density of sheeted veining that they're seeing. They can't say, oh, we see visible gold, because you don't see visible gold so much here. It's the bismuth minerals. You see these little gray specks. I mean, like little tiny fly speck bismuth stuff in these veins. That's it. You don't see the VG like you do at Snowline, say. but they can sure as heck count the number of veinlets they're getting, and they are seeing very high densities. Notice many places over 20 veins per meter. And notice like hole, what is it, 3, some of the best veining is at the end of the hole. Holy cow. Like it doesn't stop. Yeah, they ran out of drill rods, but it keeps going. All right. So that's interesting. And then even some of the recent holes over here, like 6 and 7 and stuff, absolute tons and tons of sheeted veins. Why is this important? Well, because as geologists, we tend to associate the density, how many veins you have, say, per meter, with what you might expect grade wise. Can I prognosticate? I can even tell you what the grade is? No, I don't know. Don't know. We got to wait for assays. Got to wait for assays on this one. This one is just a nail biter. Okay. But man, is that big. That is big, big. Okay. Let's emphasize that with the cross section. Go to the next slide. This shows a cross sectional view. Bloop, so we're looking at the drill holes in the vertical sense, and look at how far that goes down. Like the start of those holes is what, about 1750 RL, and they go down to 1350 RL there. Hole number 7, I think it is. And they're still in veining. The volumes of rock you're seeing here absolutely equal to Fort Knox or any of these big systems. Okay, so if this has gold in it, we now can, by the end of the season, we can put our hand to heart and say, yeah, there's a lot of rock there with gold in it. Okay, so very exciting. Let's go to the next slide. And then this one really caught my attention because this shows the current thinking around the drilling they're going to do. So they got the drill holes they've either finished or are drilling right now are the ones with the little blue dots and the black lines. Okay, but they have these ones with white, and they say pad E and pad F and pad G, and then they show the white trace. Those are planned holes. What is that telling you? Well, first of all, pads F and pad G are actually down in the valley, so they're going to have the advantage of being low, and they're going to drill long ones. Those are big boy holes. Those are holes that go down 700-800 meters. We're going to see how deep these the sheeted veining actually continues. It could be a long way. And then pad E up there, that's going to be the northernmost one. And again, the length of that puppy is huge. Okay. You might think, well, gee, it's a higher elevation. It's not going to reach the same depth. No, it's actually going to be deeper than the ones that they've already drilled. Okay. So what's the takeaway here? The company must be excited to commit to doing this, because this is a lot of work, a lot of money, but they're excited and they're going to do it. I love Simon's approach here. Swing for the fence, baby. Just if there's a big gold system here, let's figure it out this year. Does that mean they're going to have a resource by the end of the year? Absolutely not. That's crazy talk. Okay, but could they say we've got something that's about 700 or 800 meters long and about 600 or 700 meters wide and goes down 700 meters? Yeah, they can, by the end of this year, if the assays come back, they can start to kind of arm wave around what's here. Pretty cool. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, Banyan, well advanced story. I struggled with this one for a long time, but I was up there and I saw the work that they've done more recently around domaining and revising their model. Look, I don't expect anybody to read the numbers up there in the corner. Sorry, they're so stinking small. I reproduce them elsewhere. I'll show you in a minute. But the takeaway here is the footprint of this system. You see the scale down there, like that bar is 2 kilometers. Okay, so this thing from east to west is like 4 or 5 kilometers in size. Huge. Okay, that's bigger than Fort Knox. Now the yellow is where they have indicated, the orange is where they have inferred. This is an enormous gold system. And the other thing I'm going to point out, go to the next slide, is that right now, everything they define is like a thin skin. Okay, think about this for a minute. That's a thin skin, and that's largely driven by just the depth of drilling. Does it mean there's nothing below? No, there's plenty. There's probably plenty below that. Okay, you got something that's kilometers long, and they've only drilled the little veneer, and they've come up with millions of ounces of gold. Now, in this particular case, you can see the numbers there. Yellow is greater than 1, red's greater than 2, and pinks are greater than, 1 1 to 2 is red, and then what would that be? Pink is greater than 2. There we go. That's how it works. All right. So what's changed about this? Okay, the domaining. Okay, see how it's like little layers in there? They've actually started to define and domain the rock and the gold better, in my view, and it's really helped with the understanding, the confidence around this thing, but also the grade. I think that's a big part. Okay, what's the upside? Huge. This thing could go down in the ground a long ways. It could expand along strike. There's nothing closing it off on either end. This is an absolutely enormous gold system. It's almost hard to conceptualize. Go to the next slide. And by the way, it's in a great location jurisdictionally, like, or infrastructure wise. There's lots of infrastructure. Go to the next slide. We're going to look at the numbers real quick. I'm going to highlight 2 numbers. So at a 1/4 gram cutoff, if you take, and I can do this, so I'll just chuck it in there, but you can take your inferred and indicated. So the one there on the left, the 1.8 million ounces. Then over here you got 5.9 in inferred. We're already, what, 7.7 million ounces or something right there. A 1/2 gram. Well, that's better than the average grade at Fort Knox right now. Okay, so that's pretty good. All right, but if we look at higher cutoffs, in other words, we kind of look through the forest and see the trees there, you can see it like a 0.55 gram cutoff. You got 1 million ounces indicated at 0.92, and you got another 2.9, almost 3 million ounces at 0.97. Guess what? When Fort Knox started as a mine, and I was standing on the first friggin' bench, it was 0.96 grams per ton. That's the same grade there, guys. I'm telling you, this has every in every aspect as big as Fort Knox, and it should be a good mine. All right, go to the next slide. Trifecta. Oh man, this news came out in a very timely fashion. It came out actually a few, like 2.5 or 3 weeks ago. There are times when things slip past me, and I feel like a dork, but whatever. They got the drill permit for rye. Okay, they've also been doing work out there in the sheeted veining. Look at the sheeted veining in this granite. Is that not to die for? Oh my gosh. Okay, they will, I hope, be drilling this because they got their drill permit granted for rye property. I know it was a battle for Richard to get this. He was pulling his hair out when I saw him in early July, but he pulled it off, baby. And they're going to go drill. And I would say, look, the way I could see a story like this unfold, maybe they drag a drill over there. By the way, this is, over in eastern Yukon. Maybe they drag a drill over there and they drill 3-4 holes like Snowline did back in 2021. Just quietly drill them and then come out with big intercepts. And like everybody goes, oh, that's interesting. And, maybe we all get lucky. That's my hope. I think this project looks very good. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, Onyx is even doing work now. Yeah, they've refocused a lot of their effort back in Timmins because they got the discovery at Crisis. But to be frank, the big emphasis was this King Tut project. And the Golden Mask and Main Tut zones and Raw are all getting a good shake this season. I don't think they're going to drill. Okay, I did talk to the company back in early July. I don't think they're going to drill. But I think given the work they're doing, we might see some new information come to light. They're doing a lot of saw channel samples and things like this across sheeted vein zones. And I hope that we see them announce, some long channel samples, hopefully with good gold grades. You can see the distribution of gold anomalism across these intrusions, very robust. It reminds me a lot of Valley. So not a drill discovery yet, but at least they're advancing it. They haven't forgotten about it. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now I'm shifting gears. Okay, we have just left the Tintina belt and we have taken a long plane flight to Brazil. Okay, in this Cajueiro district, which belongs to Altamira Gold, is basically a very similar style system to what we just talked about, albeit much, much older. These rocks are 1.x billion years old, where the ones up in the Yukon and Alaska are more like 100 million years old. But nonetheless, they're the same types of system. And what are we looking at here? Well, the company's done a really good job expanding from their initial discovery at Cajueiro Central and expanding and finding more and more targets across the property. Again, think upside down cow. You've got a whole bunch of teeth sticking out of the ground here. Absolutely amazing. They're all very similar, intrusive rocks that are poking their way up and generating these gold anomalies. Okay, why is this important? Well, look at the scale on this thing. It's absolutely huge. Like that's 2 kilometers down there at the bottom. Like from east to west here, we're looking at 15 kilometers. North to south, we're looking at 10 kilometers. This is an absolutely enormous udder, if you will, that's kicking these things off. That's why I get excited about this. Is it super high grade? No. But in this part of the world, met friendly, large volume, we know that Paracatu mine, for example, Kinross's mine there in Brazil, average grades like 0.4 something gram, absolutely pukes money at this price. And this reminds me of one of these just huge volume gold systems that could rival something like that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here's what we're dealing with. You can see in photograph, we got this porphyry intrusive phase. So it is a quote porphyry, but don't let that bother you. It's the same flavor, okay, and it's very low in sulfide, so there's hardly any pyrite and stuff. It's got the little sheeted quartz veins riddled all through it. You can see them everywhere. Some are black, kind of like on the right hand side, and some are more white, like you see in the middle. But they're all little gold specks and stuff, in this type of sheeted veining. It's the same beast, okay? And these guys, yeah, they drilled some shallow holes and they put a resource together at Maria Bonita, but where are they headed? Well, I'm going to tell you. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, again, push metallurgy. They did it. They did a great job doing metallurgy, and you can see everything they've done to date shows that, agitated leach, very high recovery, column leach, which is effectively a proxy for heap leach, good recovery, quick recovery, Basically, this is free milling. Remember the free milling? See the red circle there? They are in that regime. That's why a project like this, even though it's low grade, will work in Brazil, where you have good power supply and relatively cheap power and stuff like this. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the same image I showed at the beginning of the Altamira Prezzo, but it's zoomed in, okay, and I clipped the little resource tables for Cajueiro Central and Maria Bonita, and I pasted them in there. Okay, so the 2 little tables that you see are the resource. Now notice at Maria Bonita, they have some oxide and they got some sulfide. When they say sulfide, it doesn't bother me because the sulfide here is not refractory. So it's basically, it's almost like saying the same thing. Don't let that even bother you. Okay, but if you add up the numbers here, they have on the order of 700,000 or 800,000 ounces of gold in inventory over here at Maria Bonita with just a few shallow drill holes. That's crazy. Okay, a few 100, 200 meter drill holes, and bam, they've already got a big resource over here at Cajueiro, which is where they focused all their effort initially. And good on them, but they have about 700,000 ounces if you add up all the numbers over here at Cajueiro. Okay, so right now we're already at like 1.4 or 5 million ounces, but they've tested, maybe 20% of what you see here, and plus what's happening at depth. Okay, what's going on? Like if they drill deeper holes at Maria Bonita, what are they going to hit? Don't know, but they could hit a lot. Okay, the volumes of rock that are likely present here are absolutely jaw dropping, and I think that this is, and the placer coming off. Huge amounts of placer gold, just like all of these camps. This smells like a big one. Yeah, low grade ish, but that's all right. Here, it's going to work. It's going to work. All right, so go to the next slide. I think that should be the end.